Well, good afternoon. This is Crossing Borders, the new IMC streaming service, which is intended to keep our community of investment migration professionals together. The coronavirus has now infected nearly 1.5 million people worldwide, but its impact extends far beyond those who have had it. An unprecedented event in our history of probably biblical proportions. It seems that even the frequency of the word unprecedented is unprecedented. Now, according to Google Trends, the word has been used 3 times more in the last 2 weeks than ever before recorded. So as governments around the world have enacted new measures and given official advice, we look at the impact that the virus has had and is having on our industry. And today I'm joined by a panel of 5, each an expert in their respective areas of business and geographic regions, who will introduce themselves and give us, in about 1 minute, a summary of the situation in their respective countries and regions. And we'll go sort of clockwise, and I'll start with James Johnston, who's in Scotland, and I think, can you hear us, James?
Indeed. And Bruno, fellow panelists and audience, good afternoon. As Bruno said, my name's James Johnston. I spent 26 years in the Royal Air Force as a pilot, executive and very senior commander, and the vast majority of my time was spent on operations and in support of working with other nations. My work's included working at the highest levels of government as a public servant and primarily as a cross-government auditor on capability. I did leave the service in 2012, and since I've been working at the strategic level within the regional business forums and with economic partnerships looking at change. And I'm firmly now established there, and I now provide specialist advice. And for instance, one of my particular jobs at the moment is on space and the exploitation of space, and advice to both the Scottish Government and the enterprise agencies. I'm a practicing mediator, and I'll come back to that during this afternoon's talk. And I currently manage 4 legal teams on 4 continents, and sort of have a reputation as a strategic troubleshooter. In terms of this afternoon, specifically with regard to the topic, one of my main experiences was being on the first writing team with the Cabinet Office for the UK National Risk Register, and my subject matter area was pandemics. In terms of the UK, we currently have record.
Yeah, so James, we've lost you a little bit at the moment.
UK is currently in a state of what we're calling lockdown, although I'm uncomfortable with that term. But rather in isolation in order to address the issues around coronavirus and the way in which viruses propagate. But the main issue here for the UK is, as with other nations, is that by and large the economy has come to a stop, and our focus rightly is on preserving life and giving hope to our community and those beyond our borders that in terms of dealing with the coronavirus in the right way will not only preserve life but give us the opportunity to recover more quickly, and also to as long-term important, provide support to the global economy, and the UK can't ignore that as being the 7th largest economy in the world. So I guess the message is we all have a part to play, both individually and collectively. The UK in isolation is very much looking after its own, but that is no different to other countries. And I would suggest that where we are at the moment, we're in week 3 of isolation, and the debate within the Cabinet Office and the government is as to when we can start looking at easing the isolation restrictions. But from my own personal perspective, I think that is between 3 to 4 weeks off at the very earliest.
All right, thanks very much, James. Moving on to Charles Mizzi, who's the Chief Executive for the Malta Residency and Visa Agency. Your background is quite interesting, Charles, because you have a banking background and you're also the Executive Director for the Maltese Presidency of the European Council not so long ago. Can you give us quickly an update? What's the situation on the ground in Malta, please?
Good afternoon, Bruno, my colleagues. Obviously, Malta has been affected by COVID-19 like anywhere else. Fortunately, though, cases so far are still quite low. Obviously, one has to put it into perspective of the local dimensions. Malta is a very small island with around 475,000 people living. So far, we've had around 299 cases, reported cases. The number of cases that are reported per day are also quite low, which is very satisfying. In fact, today we've had just 6. That doesn't mean that we have to relax and sort of stop listening to the advices that are being issued on a daily basis by the Public Health Directorate. But that means that the strategy that the government is adopting, I think, is reaping fruit. The government has put a lot of measures in place in order to try to flatten the curve as much as possible. And I think we're getting very good results. In fact, if I remember well, last week, WHO commended Malta also for the way they are handling the situation. It did have an impact, an economic impact. As you probably know, Malta relies a lot on tourism, and like most of other countries, we had to close the borders, and we don't have any incoming tourism at the moment. So we are experiencing a slowdown in certain areas, like the catering industry, tourism, etc. But there are other industries which are still operative. Some of the entrepreneurs are also being creative and diversifying and coming up with new ideas. Some of them are also helping the government. I've seen in the news today there is a sort of manufacturing company who is producing masks and in support of the local authorities. Another company has donated its employees in order to help the tourism ministry in order to embellish public areas. So, because obviously this is the right time in order to carry out certain infrastructural works which might have been pending for quite some time. Because if you do it wisely and retaining the social distancing strategy, this could help us to get back to normal ways faster once COVID-19 is over.
All right. Thanks very much, Charles. I guess one of the big advantages is being an island. It's much easier to lock down borders than when you have, multiple borders with other countries. And being a small country, it's easier to be quite reactive. I want to try to bring in Jennifer Lai, who's also a panelist on this session and who's based out of Hong Kong. She's the managing partner for Henley and Partners, one of the larger global citizenship and residency planning companies. Jennifer, can you hear us? No, not yet. I think Jennifer's having some technical problems, but I'm hopeful that she will manage to resolve those in the next few minutes, because it'll be very interesting to hear what's happening in Asia, specifically Wuhan. It's been on the news today. But let's move over to the Caribbean, another island which is very dependent on tourism. Nestor Alfred, the Chief Executive of the St. Lucia CIU, and also the Chairman of the Regional Association for countries in the Caribbean that have citizenship by investment programs. So Nestor, what's happening on the ground in St. Lucia and in the wider 5 countries that have programs, please?
Good. Bruno, I think it's good afternoon on your end, but on my end it's good morning. and panelists, thank you very much for being here as well today to have this, what I think would be a very interactive discussion, and viewers, welcome. Bruno, for the Caribbean region, this pandemic is very challenging. And I think post-COVID-19, I think the region will also find itself in a very deep economic strain. COVID-19 has presented its challenges for the region in various fronts. As you would know, the Caribbean region is heavily dependent on tourism. Tourism is our #1 foreign exchange earner. The smaller islands, the islands that form part of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and which coincidentally are the islands who are involved in the citizenship program. Those islands, again, don't have any other sector other than tourism that generates that kind of revenue for it. And therefore, with COVID-19, with all of the hotels being shut down, zero occupancy, one could imagine the challenges that the governments of this region is facing. And then you also have to look at the health services and the capacity of the health services to deal with any major or community outbreak of COVID-19. So as a region, it is extremely challenging for us. But I think the region has been very responsive in regard to its actions and some of the protocols that it has undertaken to ensure that it stops the spread of this virus. But what is very interesting, however, as well, is that despite its own efforts, we've seen some spikes, especially in certain countries. For example, in St. Lucia, sometime around the month of April, we only had 2 or 3 recorded cases. As of now, we have 14 recorded cases. In islands like 14.
14.
Yeah, 14. In Dominica, there's about 15. In Barbados, there's 24. In Jamaica, coincidentally, which is one of the bigger islands within the Caribbean states, sorry, records about 63. Trinidad tops the list with 105. In the smaller islands, there's been absolutely no deaths. In Trinidad and Dominica, there have been a few deaths. I think in Trinidad, there have been about 7 deaths coming out of COVID, and in Jamaica, there are about 3 deaths. But I think for the region has been very much concerned in regard to ensuring that there is no community spread. And in the case of St. Lucia, most of our cases have been imported cases. But in recent days, there's been one particular case which seemed to have been a community focused. And because of this, the government immediately initiated a lockdown of the country in order to give health practitioners the opportunity to trace COVID, where this actually came from, and who were the persons who were in contact with that individual. So yes, it is a challenging time for the region, and I'm hoping that somewhere along the line there's a silver lining.
Okay, thanks very much, Nestor. I want to move over to Edward in Florida. You know, the news, particularly today, this vicious respiratory disease is having on the US. The news would be, make us believe that, the White House is in chaos. There isn't agreements between governors and the president on what is lockdown, which states are doing lockdown. The cases seem to be increasing exponentially every day. What's the situation on the ground in Florida and the wider US for you? I think your microphone might be on mute, Ed.
Is it okay now?
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Thank you, Bruno, and colleagues and attendees. I think that we've got a lot to talk about, and we'll try to be very brief. But just as a brief introduction, Bruno, I've been in the US now for 40 years, originally from Australia, admitted to the bar as a barrister and solicitor, came to the US, obtained a Juris Doctor degree, and been practicing business immigration law, mainly in Orlando for 37 years. An adjunct professor of business immigration law at the University of Florida Law School, on the advisory committee task force for IMC. IMC has a strategic alliance with IUSA, which represents the EB5 industry in the United States, and I'm on the Best Practices Committee and New Investor Markets Committee. Last year, 2019, I was very privileged to receive an award for the Innovator of the Year award for 2019. But briefly, that's a little bit about my background. But as far as the US is concerned, we have 330 million people in the US. In Florida alone, we have close to 25 million people. In the US right now, we have confirmed cases, 402,000 confirmed cases of the virus. As far as deaths, it just reached 13,000. In Florida, we have 14,000 confirmed cases and deaths 296. But again, as you said, Bruno, we have 50 governors, 50 states. The president, Trump, and his cabinet and the leaders of this initiative to basically battle this, and they treat it as a war, battling this virus. We've got Dr. Fauci. They've been doing a pretty good job, Bruno. They've been able to convince the governors to have this, stay-at-home policy until April the 30th. It may go a little bit longer. They've created new programs to cover the 6.6 million Americans that are unemployed all of a sudden, right? So they've created payroll protection plans where businesses can get loans or a certain amount of funds from the government to cover payroll and rent over the next few months, small business administration loans, etc. So they're trying to keep the businesses afloat throughout the US. And
do you see that 6.6 million? Do you see that doubling in the next 2 weeks, that figure?
Well, really, the good news is that we've, seen this concern that the number of deaths in the US could go anywhere between 100 to 200,000 deaths, right? But that's an estimate. Right now, the good news is that it seems to have reached a plateau. We're not letting our guards down, but there's been a huge initiative to bring in ventilators and masks, from globally. Certain states that have used the ventilators and their numbers are going down, then sending the ventilators to other states.
Right.
Also,
sorry, Edward, with 6.6 million unemployed, that figure doubled from 2 weeks ago. Do you see that doubling again in 2 weeks' time?
I don't think so. I don't think it's going to double. I think it really depends on the control of the pandemic. And what the government has done is that they've talked about a new drug combination, right? They've introduced a combination of the hydroxychloroquine, which is an anti-malaria drug, and the azithromycin antibiotic drug, and it's supposed to shorten the recovery time. So they've are looking at the combination of these two drugs to do that. The unemployment has increased because restaurants have closed down. In Orlando alone, you have the main theme parks, Disney World, you've had Universal Studios, SeaWorld, the Kennedy Space Center, all closing down, and therefore it's created increase in unemployment, and not just in Florida, but that's been duplicated in other states, right? So I think that it can come back. It's going to come back.
We'll come back to that, the economic fallout, a little bit. I want to bring in Jennifer live, because I think she's back on the line with us now. Jennifer, you're in Hong Kong. I know it's a little bit late over there, about 11 or midnight. Can you hear us properly? I can see that Jennifer is there. But she's self-muted.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Absolutely, yes. Jennifer. We can, but we can't see you.
I'm very sorry. So, my dear,
Jennifer, you're the managing partner for Henley and Partners in Hong Kong. You're in charge of a number of countries over there. The big news today is that after 76 days in lockdown, the residents of Wuhan have been allowed out of their homes, which is an encouraging sign, of course. What's the situation on the ground in Hong Kong and in China in respect of the virus?
Hi, my fellow panelists. Sorry that I wouldn't be able to share my face, but I will share my insights here with my audio. Thank you for the question. I'm Bruno. Currently, as probably we all know, that China, Wuhan is the first city that had the first case. Up to date, there are actually confirmed 81,802 cases. 77,279 cases are recovered. Okay, the death case is 3,300. If you look at Hong Kong, we actually have 960 cases confirmed, 264 recovered cases, and 4 death cases. You're quite right. Currently in Wuhan, actually the city actually is not locked down anymore, and actually the airport is opened. And for the whole China, actually the government departments, there's no special measures, and actually they encourage the enterprise to go back on work. Okay, so a lot of the private enterprises, they're now starting the flexible working arrangements for their employees to come back work in their factories or even in the office now. If you see in Shanghai, for example, I know a lot of our service providers, they're actually having an alternate day work arrangements, or they work from home. But we see that they're starting to picking up, well compared to previous, where the China actually was Shanghai, Beijing, specifically Wuhan is totally locked down. So if you look at Hong Kong, actually the government departments has special arrangements. We have essential emergency limited public service only. The Hong Kong immigration, basically they have flexible hours as well. So for the private enterprise, the government actually urged that we will have a flexible hours. So this is something the government is implementing. Of course, we do have this social distancing, that we're not allowed to go to any social gathering like in the restaurants for more than 4 people. But this is not happening in China. This is only happening in Hong Kong. Okay, right, so this is the current situation.
What we're seeing is a gradual easing of restrictions on residents and citizens as well. I want to bring James back into the fray here. We've seen that Prime Minister Johnston is in hospital. One of the first global leaders of Western countries to be hospitalized. He's spending his 2nd night in intensive care. My question to you is, how well do you think the global community is prepared to deal with a long drawn out pandemic like this, and what those implications could be for the investment migration industry? And before you answer though, we are going to put this to our audience as well. So I'm going to click on a poll, and it'll be interesting to see what the audience think of this. So I'm going to launch that now. So you should be able to see that. So please take a few minutes to answer. So I can see the answers are coming in now, but James, the floor is yours to answer in between.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Bruno. Boris Johnson being the first world leader to be admitted to hospital and to intensive care is significant, and I think primarily because it just demonstrates that nobody is invincible to this. And one may have seen international press reports that President Putin was claiming that there was an invincibility in Russia to the virus, which is transpiring to be not true. But that's no surprise. We're all human beings. We all have DNA, and we all interact with RNA. So the point is that anyone can get it. He is, according to reports, stable. He's not on a ventilator. He is on additional oxygen supply. And the interesting thing about his situation, along with many others, Bruno, is that we are still trying to understand how this virus affects different people, how the interaction creates a worse condition and ultimately death with some, how it exacerbates other conditions in others, and actually how some are asymptomatic. And until we develop a test that is recognized as being secure, that tells us that you have antibodies, your immune system has started to react to it, then you find yourself in this no man's land of, quite literally, a bad test is not worth the money at all. So testing is really important. And I think that's the point that with Boris Johnson being in hospital, there's a lot of nonsense in the press about constitutional issues, about the running of the United Kingdom and the role that the Prime Minister plays. But constitutionally, well, there is no constitution for the UK. There is a government with collective responsibility. Boris Johnson is the primus inter pares. He has passed the baton to Dominic Raab as a nominated deputy to make those decisions when they are required. But by and large, the cabinet will get on with sorting out the business as the executive of the United Kingdom.
So the audience here thinks that 58% of respondees think that we're not, the global community isn't really well prepared to deal with a long drawn out pandemic, and only 8% think we're doing very well. What's your experience in working with governments and global companies in dealing with crisis management and planning, strategic planning? Have they been planning for pandemics at all? Some of the clients and governments you've been dealing with, have they been putting enough resources to this?
I think Bruno, thank you. And I have to say my vote would be in the purple line in the 58%. Not doing well at all, but it's not because people are doing a bad job. It's because we are not geared to deal with a global shutdown. We have become dependent on a global community of communicating through business. And when you take away one of those pathways by shutting down global business, then you take away a method of communicating. Secondly, that we don't have the institutions. Post Westphalia, we have the nation state type organizations, but it has just been remarkably quiet from the likes of the United Nations, the European Union, even the World Health Organization. Now, stand fast with the latter. Their website is fantastic for nations to dip in, but they have no coordinating authority with nation states to determine what should happen. And my reason why I said we're not coping very well is because we haven't got the mechanisms between nations to actually be able to deal with the migration of the virus. And, a virus requires on three things: density of the virus, the proximity, how close you get to it in order to catch it, and mobility, how it moves around, both transmitting on, be it water droplets, or indeed moving through either symptomatic or asymptomatic people. So hence the reason, the importance of stopping people moving around, hence the importance of isolation as a principle. So we've considered and asked Bruno the tools, but we haven't thought how we apply them.
Indeed. Okay, I want to move down to Charles Mizzi, because we're talking about how governments are responding, how authorities are responding. There's been a lot of commentary about how the European Commission and European Parliament are responding, which so far is overwhelmingly negative. But I'm coming to you because Malta, of course, is a member of the European Union and has been, I think, since 2004, if I'm not mistaken. Cyprus is a neighbor of Malta as well. I hear that Cyprus is looking to fast track applications for its various investment migrations program. What's been the impact, very briefly, on your program at the Visa Residency Agency, and what are you doing in the face of the pandemic to review some of the processes that could help applicants and agents move along in the times of many people working from home? So Charles, what's your reaction and your response been to this, please?
To summarize the impact that we've had so far, I would say that there have been sort of operational impact more than anything else. From our side, obviously, government has encouraged entities in order to work from home as much as possible. So we had to adjust our way of working. We have most of our people working from home. We work on a skeleton staff basis. We have a few people from each unit here at the office every day, but most of the rest are at home working normally, or making the best out of the situation. But I think the biggest challenge that we have faced is in terms of the agents' work. Most of the agents are having difficulty in order to get applications from other regions, like Asia, for example. In order to also they have problems in order to reach the applicants, in order to clarify any questions that we may have, or to sign documents. So I would say that this is the major difficulty that we have been facing so far. Over the recent days, we have seen an improvement. We have experienced an increase in the number of applications and documents that have been submitted to us over the last 2 or 3 weeks, which is quite encouraging. And this helped us to get back on track, not to the levels that we have been before COVID-19, but it is quite encouraging. From what we have done from our side, obviously, is that we did some adjustments. We have showed a bit more flexibility. Because obviously we understand the situation. This is an unprecedented situation. No one was expecting this. So we are trying to help the agents as much as possible in order to keep things moving, to keep the business going. What in a way, this has also helped us a bit as well, because it gave us time and the opportunity in order to look at our processes and improve. In fact, we did an internal exercise in order to see, sort of, to identify some bottlenecks that we were having, and we have addressed them, and this is having a good impact on our operations, and we've seen an increase in the output from our side during the last couple of months. So hopefully, when things get back to normal, we will be in a much better situation than we were before COVID-19, in order to be prepared for the eventual increase and in the number of applications that will be submitted to us over the next few months.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to bring in Nestor Alfred, the head of the CIU in St. Lucia, on this. From what I've read, is the pandemic has revealed some disparities in processing systems among RCBI programs. So, for example, in Dominica, the CIU is pretty much accustomed to processing during hurricanes, for example. As is probably Antigua and Barbuda. I'm not entirely sure of St. Lucia, so possibly you can address that. But is this the case for all CIUs in the region? Are you used to these kind of remote working environments where the country goes on almost shut down, locked down for various reasons? You'll need to put your microphone off mute.
Thanks, Bruno. As you rightly stated, I think Dominica had the opportunity of testing its processing platform and having the opportunity of proving that it can work remotely and still process application irrespective of this hurricane that devastated the island. I think we all may have learned from this. So in regard to St. Lucia, we spent quite a bit of time and resources ensuring that the processing platform can be dealt with and can be managed remotely. And from March the 24th, the CIP St. Lucia has been working remotely, and we've been processing applications and granting citizenship remotely. So luckily for St. Lucia, our processing platform can be managed remotely. I think for most of the islands, I think there may be one exclusion, which I may not want to mention now, who may be having some challenges in regard to being able to process applications remotely. I think Charles also covered it very nicely, that one of the greatest challenges we have at this present moment is having supporting documents to go along with the application. For example, attestations, interpretations of foreign languages. And I think from our end, I think we've taken a position to work on these matters on a case-by-case basis. But what is very clear is that we have made a decision to allow the application to go through the entire process. But where it stops is in regard to making a decision. And therefore, we would await the more pertinent information like police certificates and certain documents to make sure that they are in there before a final decision is made. But it's trying, it's a trying time. But I think if you look at China, I think China is opening up a little, and our due diligence firms are now telling us that they can go on ground and undertake certain validation of documentation. So there is some silver lining appearing, and so I think there are challenges, and I think we have to find ways to work around those challenges. But I think in trying to find ways to work around those challenges, we must ensure that we don't dilute the issue of due diligence and proper due diligence and care in how we process those applications.
Are you saying that all your service providers, like your due diligence companies, and most probably are in New York or in Europe, and your other service providers, are they all operating mostly normally now that they've settled in this, home working, remote environments?
In regard to St. Lucia, I think there were a lot of applications in the pipeline before COVID-19 pandemic, and I think those are moving smoothly. I think with new applications coming through the pipeline, you could see that there is some delays taking place, and I think depending on the region that you are in, I think those delays are more apparent. So I'll give you a clear example. For example, applications coming from the MENA region, specifically from Dubai. There's no issue in regard to getting the police character references or police records, simply because that can be retrieved online. In certain parts of the world, is a bit of a challenge. But I think you could see there are some changes taking place, and you could see that things are moving not as speedily as it should, but there's some turnaround taking place.
All right, that's good. I've got another poll. Yes, James.
I'd just like to come in and support Nestor there, and I think one of the other tensions that we may well see, and I know the UK may well suffer from that, is the government handling of applications as we come to the other side, when we have the redeployment of staff to help the broader elements of the economy get going. I think the way in which we have a very mobile civil service, in particular here in the UK, means that there may not necessarily be the governmental support in places to make sure that after the agents have done their work with the applications, that they are then processed through the government elements as quickly as they were done. And we could see us literally having applications waiting at the door because there aren't the staff internally in the public service to actually deal. Just a view.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I want to bring in another poll now from for our audiences. So I think this is one of the questions it's come up in the past, particularly in the case of the Caribbean when there was the hurricane about 2-3 years ago. So the question should be launching now. And the question is, do you think clients expect discounts will soon be announced by Citizenship, by investment programs, by RCBI? In fact, we can also bring in the Malta Visa Residency Agency, because it's a question that a lot of Middle Eastern agents have asked me and have questioned in Asia as well. So I think that's a question for Charles, Nestor, and to a certain extent we'll try and see what Edward thinks on this as well, given his global experience as an immigration attorney. So we're still collecting the responses.
Yes, Sudan?
Can you, as panel members, can you see the poll on your screens?
Yes, we can, Bruno. Well,
Yes,
Yeah, we can.
we
Can you
can.
see the responses as well?
Yes, we can see the poll, and but we can't see the video.
Okay, but you can see the responses.
No.
The responses are not there yet, I think. Yeah.
All right, it's still moving. Yeah, people are still voting here. So I've got 60% of people voting, but you know, we could probably, you know, at the moment it looks like 53% of our audience today expect discounts will be introduced by CIPs, and 22% think there won't be any discounts. Nestor, your thoughts, please, on that. Any big announcements to make today?
Well, look, if you appreciate that when you think of a country and its public service is either running on a skeleton platform or is completely shut down, the public service is really the pillar or the driver, one of the main drivers of the economic spin-off of any country. And when you think of tourism being the main foreign exchange earner coming at a complete halt, the Citizenship by Investment program may be the only viable revenue generating platform for small island economies like ours. And therefore, I think the region or the governments of this region now have to think in a very proactive way as to how they deal with this matter. And from my perspective, I wouldn't be surprised, and I think the poll, the results of the poll showed it. I think 53% are quite right that there will be some discounts taking place. I think some islands will be quite innovative in regard to restructuring some of the various routes for the grant of citizenship. I wouldn't be surprised if islands do come out with specific relief kind of social-based programs to generate applications. So yes, the response to your question is I think there'll be discounts, there'll be innovative ways in driving numbers, and I think it's a matter of time to see those coming out.
Okay. Charles Mizzi, your thoughts on that?
I think when it comes to our program, I think it's already very advantageous. In fact, the government contribution is quite low. So personally, I don't see how we can reduce that much further. From our side, the call from the agents have been and from the applicants to be more efficient, and we are addressing that. Because obviously they would like to receive feedback from our side after conducting due diligence as fast as possible, because even the situation is actually it's giving people some more thought on the need to acquire a second residency, so as to have a backup plan just in case of situations like the ones we're experiencing so far. Obviously, generally speaking, I think it's a situation that each government has to look at, considering its own situations and considerations.
Right.
I would be surprised if we have CIPs that consider this strategy. From our side, I think it will be very difficult to reduce the pricing further than it is today.
All right. Okay, Edward, I want to bring you in on this. The US Senate finally passed, I think it's a $2 or $3 trillion emergency corona virus fund into the economy. There was talk about bringing in the EB5 program into the corona rescue bill. I'm not now sure where things stand with that. But EB5 is, you know, a relatively important economic enabler, certainly in smaller states. or targeted employment areas in the US. So a couple of questions. Do you see EB5 now standing a better chance of having permanent authorization for the US, which is something IIUSA have been lobbying Washington for about 10, 15 years now?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bruno. The EB5 program, it stands for Employment-Based Category 5, which means that if anyone wants to invest in a project, normally a regional center project that's operated or managed by a separate developer or operator, you can. And the minimum, what's right now, what the regulation state, the EB5 regulation, is that the minimum investment is $900,000 US, as you said, Bruno, in a target employment area of high unemployment or rural, or if it's in a non-TEA or non-rural area, then it's $1.8 million, right? But most of the urban areas today would be considered non-TEAs, right? So a lot of people that want to invest in, major projects that may be hotel, residential, construction, may have to invest 1.8 million. As far as to answer your question, where are we today with legislation? There's a lot of proposals, but right now there's no definite legislation to change the minimum dollar requirements or how you classify TEAs. Okay. The immigration.
Can foreign nationals right now, can they still make investments in a US business and obtain a visa for entry to live and work in the US?
Yes, Bruno. So when we're talking about investment, foreign national investors coming to the US, there's a number of different types of investments. If you want to quickly get in a matter of a couple of months, if you are a citizen of a treaty country, for E2 visas, you can invest in a business in the US and for $100,000 plus expenses, and you can come within a couple of months. If you buy a business or franchise or set up your own business, a couple of months you can get into the US. There's another type of visa, L1, intra-company transfers, where you have a medium to large size business in another country, and that business itself can buy, for example, or set up a new business or buy an existing business. The stock, the shares of that existing business immediately come in a couple of months under the L1 and use that existing US business to actually petition, once you're here in the US, for the green card. Now, the investment amount for business buying another business in the US may be 700,000, maybe 800,000, way under the EB5 requirements. The E2 investment requirement, way under the EB5 requirement. So if we're talking about discounts right now, there are other investment ways that people can come into the US. We can bring in, for let's say $1 million, buying an existing business in the US, we can not only bring in the executive and the family, but we can bring in the vice president, another vice president. We can bring in 3 families under the L1. So
one of the questions we had is, right now, are US consulates abroad taking reservations or bookings, how you want to call it, appointments, if you like? Is the system running as it was before the pandemic started, or have things turned a little bit and it's a little bit slowed down? What's the impact of COVID-19 on US immigration?
Right. First of all, the US Immigration Service are taking petitions. There are certain petitions that in the past could have been expedited and we could have got an answer within 14 days. Now that expedited process has been stopped. We still can file petitions, in the United States, like the L1 petition or the EB5 petition can still be filed in the US, so you're in the waiting line. As far as consulate processing, that has stopped. But now is the time for everyone, and we're seeing that with our team of professionals, finders, brokers, accountants, everyone's gathering the information and documentation from the foreign national investor that wants to come to the US. We're gathering the information and documentation today, preparing the petitions. If it involves a case where we can file with what we call the remote adjudication centers of immigration in the US, we can. They're in line. And then when we're ready to send those petitions and applications to the consul, we're ready. We're not waiting for this pandemic to be over. This is the time to start preparing those applications today. And also, when we look at the foreign national investor, we're saying, well, how can we discount? If it's EB5, it requires an irrevocable commitment of $900,000, for example, when you file that petition with immigration in the US. However, the regulations, the laws, the policies allow us, right, to file the petition, but make sure that we can show the government that they can pay the investment requirement, even though it's an irrevocable commitment at the time of filing. We can show that through an installment program backed up by the US laws that they can file an approvable petition. So if it's $900,000 investment in the past, they would have to invest $900,000 at the time of filing the petition. Today, if they want to invest $300,000 at the time of filing the petition and pay installments on a monthly basis over 24 months, we've got legal arguments that they can use to show the US government that they have irrevocably committed those funds.
All right, thank you. I want to bring in Jennifer in Hong Kong. What's been your experience with your Asian clients right now? What's happening on the ground in respect of their applications? What are they thinking about? Are they holding back? Do they think there might be discounts? What's the reaction been, your clients, please?
Thank you for the question. So it's very interesting that we as a service provider in the industry, we do see two scenarios. If in the very beginning, when the epidemic happened, we do have a clients looking for alternative residency, for them to have another places that they can live, where they have a very good healthcare system and the kids can stay for a longer time for educations. And then later on, when the epidemic happened in Europe, then we start to see investor hesitated to go. For example, that we see a lot of programs where they require biometric appointments, visa extensions, anything related to lending that actually cause the client to say, oh, hold on, wait a minute, maybe I will think about it, because this has to be postponed due to the travel ban, the city lockdown, or the airport closed down because they can't even fly there for the biometrics. Of course, that there are cases that we see that clients are already engaged, which means that maybe they're already going through the process, advisory in the industry of the immigration agents or immigration lawyers or ourselves, that they would postpone the applications that they were engaged previously. Maybe they would even put the investment migration, this thoughts on hold. And they will plan rigorously and be more cautious when they're choosing the destinations. They of course, that later on, we also see, like in the recent month, we also see some clients, we show some concerns if they're choosing which jurisdiction they would choose. When they choose it, would that be, if they move that, would there be any discriminations because they are Asian clients? Those are the challenges, I think, as a service provider we face right now with the clients with all these concerns. And of course, then they started to choose from the early days of going to Europe. Now they are now switching to Asia Pacific area. Asia, for example, they would think, okay, when the cases start to, the numbers will lower, because we see the improvement, the recovery cases in China, Hong Kong, Korea, and then so maybe they will start to think, even Thailand, they will say, oh, maybe we would change our planning a little bit from the country where they need the biometric to the country they don't need biometrics, and in the Asia area, Asian regions. So being, I think, the service provider in the industry, we see a lot of us are very innovative and creative of retaining clients. In China, I think from February, they're all switching, I think the industry players, they're all switching to the online platform, digital platform for meetings, seminars, and social media in promoting different resident citizenship programs. And not just focusing on the program itself, it also starts focusing about what's the investment opportunities overseas when you move outside later on, because now you cannot do biometrics, right? But then 3 months, 5 months later, when this more contained, the situation is more contained, that means I could start actually planning ahead for my future choices of the resident and citizenship planning. And of course, I also see very interesting factors that the immigration industry, the migration industry, or even the relevant investment industry players, that when they're hosting all this online sharing session, they are being more open to a different speakers on the platforms. For example, they were invited to not just limited to migration, immigration lawyers, they were invited like tax advisors, investment advisors, lawyers, just to provide a whole overview, a holistic approach for the clients in the industry when they're choosing different residence and citizenship as their choices. I think I really agree that to Nestor earlier, for the programs that have I think this is also something that we see, like St. Lucia has a online submission, digital submission. This is very proactive. This is very creative, because what the client would say, or what the service provider in the industry would say, okay, we could actually submit it online first, right? The original document can be submitted later, before they got approved. So this is also what we see. A lot of agents are promoting programs that they would not, at this moment, that they have this online digital submission platform. This is, I think, more appealing to some of the clients. And of course, early days, the legalization is still, legalization is a challenging part, because in China, or a lot of programs that they will require, because China is a non-Hague Convention jurisdiction, they will need a double legalization, and versus when some of the embassies are closed, they are facing these challenges. So I think, coming from the service provider or the client's angle, the government program, if they could become the programs that do not have biometric collections, they do have advantages of processing all this application normally. Yeah, because they were serving these clients for the moment. Yeah.
I think a couple of takeaways there from me is that, post COVID-19, there seems to be a lot of opportunity for further investment. Correct. That's what your clients are asking for, beyond just a simple residency and citizenship planning, which of course would be a very smart thing to do. We saw that trend a little bit, in the last 12 to 18 months in any case, and that might be accelerated because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the other thing is for companies to get more tech savvy than they are today, or maybe 2 weeks ago, to get even more tech savvy with online processing, because we know that Asians are, of course, generally very, very tech savvy, which are two takeaways I see there. Now, we're running out of time here, and I just want to get a summary from each of our panel members. I guess to delve into a little bit of maybe of a crystal ball, but talking of opportunities, what do you see as opportunities for your regions post pandemic? So we'll start with James. We'll start where we started off in the first place. James Johnston in Scotland.
Okay, thanks, Bruno. I think the opportunities really are an enhancement of what we've had before the pandemic, but actually with effective learning on board. And coming to Jennifer's point about the way in which people suddenly chose where they wish to look at citizenship because of where they saw the pandemic being or not being. But the truth is, it's going to be everywhere. And so what's really important for nation states is to be able to crystallize a narrative which promotes actually how they reacted to it. So, for instance, Charles there in Malta, Malta was very much commended by the World Health Organization for the way in which they had reacted initially to the pandemic. And that's important in terms of narrative for us all, is recognizing how we react, the lessons we learn, and actually how we promote the viability of global citizenship through dealing with global epidemics. And
Nestor Alfred. I'm sorry, I have to cut you off, James. Nestor Alfred, the opportunities that you see for your region post pandemic. You need to turn your mic on.
Sorry about that.
That's good.
I was saying that Jennifer really touched on it in a very nice way. Our biggest market is the Asian market. And you've seen how the Asian community have been treated in certain jurisdictions. And I think one of the opportunities for St. Lucia is that we've always both been a very friendly country, a welcoming country, an embracing country. And I think with this pandemic and the way that the Asian community have been treated in certain countries, I think those individuals now have to make a decision as to what is the best place for them to travel, where's the best place for them to become citizens of. And I think that presents a little niche for St. Lucia. I think the other opportunities for St. Lucia is that we have to continue being innovative and being very efficient in the way that we process our applications and how we deal with our business continuity plans.
Thank you. Charles Mizzi in Malta.
I think the situation has brought some clear realities in front of us. I think we could all agree that at times we were living some crazy days. We were all inundated with work, and this reality gave us the opportunity to have a good look at inside our houses, ourselves, our place of work, in order to see where our priorities will eventually lie. From our side, we had also had time to look at our processes, how we could be more efficient, how we could be more innovative. And I do agree with what Jennifer said. I think this will eventually help us to be much more competitive and attentive to the real client needs in the future, and we have to adjust to these situations and become more flexible in order to help and to help our clients and be in a better situation to serve their needs.
Perfect. Ed Beshara, some closing thoughts on opportunities post COVID-19?
Sure. Well, I think from the US standpoint, you know, we're seeing that the plateau is almost there. You know, we can't ignore the fact that there is a large recovery of people that have the virus. There are new initiatives, not only from the pandemic side, but from the economic side. There are economic initiatives by the federal government and state governments to get back to a situation where people are doing business. In Florida, in Orlando, we usually have 120 million visitors per year. We need to get back to that type of economic activity. When we're talking about the migration, there's two types of migration to the US. The temporary visas, the non-immigrant visas, E2s, L1s, which can be attained in a couple of months for a lot less money, 100,000, 300,000. If you want to get a green card, we can convert you from an L1, E2 to an EB5. EB5s, we can do promissory notes where installments are involved. So we're going to get back to business fairly quickly as far as from the US standpoint. From the pandemic side and from the economic side, there's a lot of good things happening. And I think we have good leadership, not only from the federal government, but from the state governor's standpoint. We need to get back to do business, but we need to work with the global community. We need to work with Bruno, the European Economic Community, to make sure that we're all on the same page to get back to a situation where we can see migration. If people want to come into the US from China, from Russia, from India, and they don't have citizenship of E2 countries, they can go to the Caribbean, for example, go to Grenada, go to Turkey, get second citizenship in a matter of a couple of months, and then come into the US. So we've got all these initiatives, you know, and also the internet in the US is based upon a cable system. So we're able to network with all the team of professionals, not only in the US, but with you, Bruno, and everyone else, you know, James, Nestor, Charles, basically Jennifer, is it Jennifer?
Jennifer, yes.
Yeah, Jennifer. And so we can work together to get into a situation where people feel comfortable that they can file petitions, they can file applications, they don't need to wait. Now is the time to really start doing business. We also need one thing. We need to get rid of this notion that we have to stop trade. We have to have trade tariffs. Right now, we need to open the borders because we need masks, we need ventilators. We all need to help each other regarding this pandemic.
Completely, totally. And I tell you what, as a person who travels about 250,000 miles a year, I look forward to some return to normality and being able to be back in Orlando, back in St. Lucia, back in the UK, back in Hong Kong, Singapore and Shanghai, and of course Malta as well. I want to thank all my guests and to you, our audience. Our next event will be tomorrow at the same time, so please do check our website for details of that. And finally, a recording of today's program will be available through our website, investmentmigration.org. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you stay safe and stay home. So, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bruno. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.